Hi, my name is Joseph Fife, and I'm a 17-year-old Canadian, and I'm here to bring you the facts about the fallacies of Idle No More and Theresa Spence's Attawapiskat Reserve. Currently, Bill C-135 is the cause for the Idle No More movement. What Bill C-135 pretty much says is that about half of Canadian lakes and rivers will not be under federal protection anymore, and some of these are being taken away from First Nations protection as well. Now, they're not just leaving these lakes and streams unprotected, they are giving them to the provincial and municipalities protection. So it's just making less work for the federal government and giving it to the provincial and municipal governments. But I don't know, more people are trying to twist it by saying that these are now unprotected, they're going to be ruined within the next 150 years. They're twisting this extremely. Bill C-135 also states that First Nations are allowed to sell their land. Well, they're saying that it's saying that they're allowed to sell their land. Really what it's saying is saying that they're allowed to lease their land. Now, they're saying that this is awful, that they should not be allowed to sell their land, but if you look into history, the chiefs of these reserves have been asking for this for many years. They want to be allowed to lease their land because they want economic growth in these reserves. But the people from the Idle No More campaign, they don't know this. They're twisting it by saying, oh, we don't want to sell our land. What are you doing, making us sell our land? No, this is not true. Bill C-135 is a good thing for Canada, and the First Nations and Idle No More are twisting it into, and the media is portraying it as something that is not good for Canada. Secondly, I'm going to address Theresa Spence. Currently, as many of you know, Theresa Spence is on a hunger strike. Now, this hunger strike is actually an all-liquids diet, and many people go on all-liquids diets. She is currently drinking fish broth, medicinal teas, along with water. Now, people can live off that for quite a long time. And as you know, Miss Spence is a little larger than most people, so she has been keeping her weight up. So clearly, she's not doing too bad. So this strike she is on is to bring awareness to the poor living conditions in her reserve at Attawapiskat, which is about 2 hours north of Timmins. And if any Canadian knows, 2 hours north of Timmins is a plane ride north of Timmins. It's a very, very isolated place. So she is saying that these living conditions in her reserve are awful. People do not have running water, they don't have good sanitation systems, they don't have places to live at, they don't have food. She's saying that the Canadian government has not done what they were supposed to do. Now, let me tell you something. The Canadian government has done more than they needed to do. Since 2006, under Harper's regime, over $100 million have been pumped into this small Attawapiskat reserve. Over $100 million has been given to Theresa Spence to spend on her reserve. This reserve only has 1,900 people. That is right, less than 2,000 people receiving over $100 million. And last year, she called a state of emergency, stating that there's not proper living conditions there. Let me tell you, does this seem right to you? Over $100 million have been given to you, and there are still poor living conditions for less than 2,000 people? That is completely obscure, and she needs to be held accountable for this missing money. The Canadian government did an external audit on how she had been spending her money, and they found that over 80% of the spending she did not have adequate rationale for how she spent that money, and over 60% had no rationale whatsoever, no explanation of why or how she spent that money. Millions upon millions of dollars have gone missing from this reserve. Also, De Beers Mining Company has a dig site about 90 kilometers outside of this reserve. They employ over 60 members of the reserve and have pumped millions of dollars into the local economy there. They give Spence an annual amount of money that she has not disclosed how much it is or how she spends that money. Theresa Spence needs to be held accountable for this. She needs to be taken out of the control of Attawapiskat, and government officials need to be placed inside to take over this awful, awful situation. I believe the RCMP should be brought in, and this should be dealt with as a fraud case, because money has been gone missing from Canadian taxpayers' pockets, and the Canadian government has done nothing about it. Now I'll give you some facts about First Nations in Canada. First Nations do not pay income tax. First Nation members get free tuition. First Nation members do not pay half of the HST, which is about 7% of tax on everything. inside the reserve, they pay no tax at all. Outside the reserve, they pay half of this HST. First Nations receive cheaper gas and tobacco on the reserve, why many people go to the reserve to buy their gas and tobacco who live around there. A couple other facts. First Nations are legally allowed to be intoxicated on the reserve, whereas if we did that, it could be called public intoxication. And many other things that they get that they do not, the thing with them is they do not see what they do get. They just see what they don't get, and they try to get as much as possible from the government. They feel entitled, they feel the government should give them as much money as possible, and it needs to end, now. So the big thing about the Idle No More campaign is they want to get back. They believe that they are their own sovereignty. They believe they're their own nation. They believe they should have a nation-to-nation relationship with the Canadian government, and that they should not go through the Indian Act anymore, which says who is an Indian, where they can live, what they can do, etc., etc. Many of them feel that this was poorly negotiated and it was not fair to the First Nations at the time. So the Idle No More addresses the issue that they want to come nation to nation with Canada, and they feel they're on foot with every other Canadian as their own nationality. Now, this seems ridiculous because when Quebec tried to separate from Canada, it was stopped because they knew that they wouldn't be able to survive in Canada alone. They don't have exports, they don't have imports. Where are the First Nations going to go if they become their own nation? They can't do anything. Are they going to fight a war with Canada for our land? You see, it's so delusional thinking that they can become their own nation, and it needs to be put to an end. So this is how we're going to fix this. We are going to get rid of the Indian Act. We are going to take the youth out of these toxic environments they're living in these reserves, where the unemployment rate at Attawapiskat is over 70%. They see their parents growing up with no jobs, staying home all day. All of it, they have nothing to do in these remote locations, so they rely to doing drugs and alcohol to pass the time. We need to take these children out of these toxic environments, bring them to southern communities where they have the access to jobs and the care they need. They have access to activities, clubs, groups they can join, and this way we can put the resurgence into the First Nation culture. They say they don't want to lose their culture. We need to get rid of the Indian Act, make them all Canadian citizens, and not give them any special treatment, and they can continue their culture. Canada is known as being a multi-diverse country. We are one of the most multi-diverse countries in the world. We accept all religions, all groups of people, Muslims, Jewish people, Buddhists, Christians. Everyone gets accepted in our country. First Nations will be accepted as well. They can continue their culture. Their culture will not be squandered if they become Canadian citizens. They can practice. This is what they need to do. The stereotypes surrounding First Nations are awful, and the way to fix this is to do this. First Nations need to be part of this rich heritage, and we want to continue to embrace their culture, because it makes Canada what it is today. If we continue on the path we're on now, we will lose this historic and rich culture that is First Nations in Canada.